Welcome back, everybody. This is Days of Noah number 52. Today we're going to take a quick peek at a movie called Jack the Giant Slayer. And there's some interesting symbology in this show for sure. You know, I talk a lot about the Nephilim because what happened before the flood is really just so imperative that the fallen angels came down from the heavens, what we call outer space today, and they mated with the women. They took them by force. They mated with them. They made hybrids, and then they also mixed human DNA with animal DNA, plant DNA, everything else, and they contaminated all flesh. They made all types of chimera animals. Everything that we see in Greek, Egyptian, Roman, and Babylonian mythology, all of the multi-headed creatures and all the chimeras, the weird species that we see in mythology, that's all based on truth before the flood. And God finally judged the whole world and killed them all. Now, what's amazing is that this pre-flood world has been able to be shrouded in secrecy and mystery until now. I mean, for the last 2,000 years, really, mankind hasn't been talking about this. And you have to ask yourself why. Why was the flood erased from human history, from our stories? At least the biblical version of it. As we're going to see, the mythology wasn't erased. For the last 4,000 years, mankind has been talking about the mythologies of Hercules and the demigods and all of the fairies and all of the other things that really transpired before the flood. So what I would say is that the Genesis 6 genetic contamination, it did go on to exist throughout humanity through mythology and legend and folklore, but the literal component of it through the literal word of God, that evaporated up very quickly and had been gone for several thousand years. Well, guess what? It's finally back. God, in His infinite wisdom, has finally decided to bring that knowledge back to humanity. And this has a lot to do with that verse in the book of Daniel, where Daniel is told to seal up the book of Revelations to the last days. And then at that point, information will increase dramatically and man will go to and fro. That we now live in an era where information and the ability to receive information has gone up exponentially. And so this is the time for humanity to come back to the knowledge of the Nephilim. You say, well, why would it be important to know about them? And the answer is, they're coming back. In the last days, the Nephilim are going to resurface on this planet, and it's going to be a mighty sight to see. The same conditions that existed on earth before the destruction of the world by the flood are going to be very similar circumstances that exist on this planet before Jesus comes back in the second coming and the battle of Armageddon ensues and He destroys all the wicked and unrighteous, including all of the Nephilim that will be on the planet at that time. Now, I realize this is a lot to digest. The idea of Nephilim coming back seems truly insane. But irregardless of how it sounds, that's what it is. So, this movie, Jack the Giant Slayer, it's a pretty fascinating movie. You've got these great, big, huge giants in it. This guy right here is a giant who has a second little head on him right here. And these are the representation of the Nephilim. So let's proceed forward and take a look at the movie. Now, one of the things that you'll usually see in terms of symbolism with these Nephilim giants is that usually they're fortified with metal. You know, you can see these guys are all wearing these different metal outfits, and they carry swords and other weapons. And on the surface, that doesn't seem like much of a detail, but if you go back in time, we know that the fallen angels came down before the flood. They communicated the secrets of heaven to mankind. Specifically, though, the seed of the serpent, the Kenites. They were the wicked ones on the planet who would most easily receive that fallen angel technology. And that's why we see in Genesis 4 that Tubal-Cain, who is 7 generations removed from his ancestor Cain, is the first one who is proficient in edged weapons. He is the great artificer, as it says in Genesis 4. He's the master mason. He's basically the first true master mason and craftsman, and sort of the godfather of that Babylonian religious system, which is based on a lot of different things, occultism, but it was enshrouded around metalworking. And so that is a little nuance there that is meaningful, that these Nephilim date back to an era where the metals, the coat of arms, and things like that were just being instituted to mankind. So it starts out with a daddy telling a story to a boy and a girl. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Ask not whence the thunder comes. Ask not where the herds have gone, nor why the birds have ceased their song. When coming home, don't take too long, for monsters roam in Albion. As you can see, it's a poem. The monks were trying to find God, so they made magic seeds. I remember now. With seeds they pulled from a magical pod, the monks grew a pathway to seek out their God. When they came to what they thought was heaven's gate, they met with a terrible and grisly fate. For between heaven and earth was a perilous place, Gantua, home to a fierce giant race. With a bridge now before them to the world of men, a plague of giants descends. Taking a cue from the richest of kings, they acquired a taste for acquiring things. But the one taste that caused them to lose all control was the taste for mankind, blood, bones, and all. It's a good place to stop. So let's just review a few things here. We've all heard the story of fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. That's the story of the giant. These are the British folk tales of the giants. Notice that the monks were trying to find God, and so they made magic seeds. We're going to learn later that they used black magic to get it done. Well, in the book of Enoch, we know where black magic comes from. The fallen angels introduced it to mankind while they were making the Nephilim. So, these monks were trying to find God, and they used black magic to do it, and as a result, what happens? Well, they made a magic pod that made a pathway, right? It grew up and made this big stalk that goes up to heaven. So, and this is kind of like the Tower of Babel that'll reach the heavens. When they came to what they thought was heaven's gate, they were met with a terrible, grisly fate. For between heaven and earth, see, this is in another dimension, another parallel world, if you will. Between heaven and earth is a place called Cantua, home to the fierce giant race. See, it's a race of giants. Where did they come from? Now, with a bridge between their world and ours, the plague of giants descends. See, there's now been an opening between our realm and their realm. That's how it's going to be in the last days. When they open up the bottomless pit, and when they create a doorway between our realm and the spirit realm, these entities are going to come back through and descend upon mankind. Taking a cue from the richest of kings, these giants acquired a taste for things. But the one taste that caused them to lose all control was the taste for mankind, blood, bones, and all. They're cannibals and blood drinkers. See here, the one thing that caused them to lose all control, in other words, their favorite thing is human beings. To drink their blood and eat their flesh. Where does that concept come from? It's quite obvious. This is the story of the Nephilim. They were the blood-drinking, human-eating cannibals before the flood. Well, that's revolting. Too scary, Isabel? The little girl says, giants aren't scary. Not even their terrifying leader, a monstrous two-headed giant. Keep reading, Mother. It's just a story. And she says, is it? Is it just a story? King Eric bade the monks to return to dark arts to find some way to rule the giants. That's the magic that they were using to make the magic beans. The beans of Jack and the Beanstalk. Dark arts were being used. So they melted one down, mixed in magic and more. What do you think more means? Probably a sacrifice, human or animal. And they crafted a crown like any before. The words they use here are really great. Crafted. Witchcraft is known as the craft. So is the Masonic craft. Freemasonry is also known as the craft. So when it says that they melted one down and mixed in a little magic and more, and then they crafted a crown unlike any before, those are all innuendos that they're doing black magic and rituals. As soon as the king took the crown in hand, the giants became slave to his every command. He sent them back to the place of their birth, their home now a prison between heaven and earth. Now, this isn't before the flood, but what this is about is Solomon. If you go back and read the Grimoires of Solomon, if you go back and read the Lesser and Greater Keys of Solomon, Aleister Crowley did many amazing witchcraft miracles, not miracles, but rituals and expansions on Solomon's teachings. King Solomon had learned how to control the demonic realm and the fallen angels and the Nephilim. He was into the dark arts. He was into child sacrifice. He used the seal of Solomon to open up doorways to control and manifest the spiritual realm. And so that's what we're looking at here. This King Eric in the story, as soon as King Eric took the crown in hand, the giants became slave to his every command. He sent them back to a place of their birth. Their home now is a prison between heaven and earth. That's the bottomless pit, by the way, where their imprisonment is. Eric served the link between the giants and men, and peace returned to his kingdom again. Eric severed the link between giants and men, and peace returned to his kingdom again. The mystical relics were all that remained safe with Eric through the years that he reigned. And when time came at last for King Eric to sleep, he took the crown and the seed with him for permanent keep. And as the king's bones slowly crumbled away, truth became legend. There it is. What was really a truthful story, but seems so incredibly insane to us today, has become legend, or so people say. What will happen when the giants come back? See the question they pose? They're insinuating that one day the legend will come true and the giants will come back. They won't, son, says the dad. But what if they do, says the son. Well, I guess the king's guardians will have to cut them down to size. Now we're talking about Jesus Christ, the king. I want to be a guardian, says the boy. You have the right what? Spirit, no doubt about that. Notice that when the giants come back, only the king's guardians of humanity will be able to cut them down to size. Who is that? Now we're talking about the 144,000 and those who are walking in the complete manifestation of the Holy Spirit and Jesus Christ in the last 3.5-year ministry of Christ. The second prophetic fulfillment of Christ, who's working through his remnant. So this guardian of humanity is the Lord's people. That's why they have to have the right spirit, no doubt, the Holy Spirit. The king's guardians must be born of noble blood. That's right. All of us who've been born again are born of noble blood. Doesn't Paul say that you are a noble people, a noble priesthood, a special people? If you've received the Spirit of God, then you have been grafted into the nation of Israel, and you've received your birthright as a son and daughter of the Most High God. That makes you born of noble blood. It's only a story, Jack. How do you know giants aren't real, says Jack. I don't. And jealous eyes are looking down on peaceful fields in Albion, and enemy vows will come a day when giants return and giants stay, to wage a war and this time win, to eat the last of Eric's kin. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Now I realize it's easy for us to say, well, this is just the over-imagination of people over the last couple centuries. But if you've seen the first couple lectures in the Days of Noah series, we've revealed the Genesis 6 conspiracy. We've revealed the origins of the Book of Enoch. And it makes it clear that this was a real account. And don't you find it fascinating that 5,000 years later, we're sitting here in the year 2020, still watching movies about this same concept? Why do you think that is? So in this story, King Eric, using the dark arts, finds a way to control these Nephilim entities. And that is a typology of who Solomon was. Now, according to mythology, King Solomon originally wrote the book for his son Rehoboam, and he commanded him to hide it in his tomb upon his death. Allegedly, the book was later discovered by a group of Babylonian philosophers while they were repairing Solomon's tomb. Now, one of these men received a vision in which an angel commanded him to hide the book from the unworthy. This led the philosopher to cast a spell on the book. And the story goes on, and at the end of the day, it's a mythological story. We don't know if Solomon really wrote it. But at this point, it doesn't really matter, because the mythos is that Solomon wrote it. The grimoires of Solomon are real. They have real spells, real chants. People like Aleister Crowley have perfected these things. We can see this down here on the bottom left. We've got the keys of Solomon, Clavicula Solomonis, that's the Book of Solomon. Notice it's got the seal of Solomon on the front, the six-pointed star inside of a circle. That was Solomon's official seal that he used on all of his documentation back in the day. He had a signet ring with that stamp of approval on it. And then guys like Aleister Crowley continued studying the magic grimoires of Solomon. Aleister Crowley. You see a five-pointed star inside of a circle. So whether the story is true or not doesn't even matter anymore, because the magic in it is real. That's all that matters. Now, they claim it goes back to Solomon. We can't completely vet that, but we have no reason to discredit that. We know Solomon fell into witchcraft. We know that Solomon at the end had 300 concubines, married women from all the different pagan nations, and set up altars to Baal, Moloch, and Ashtaroth. By the way, altars to Baal, Moloch, and Ashtaroth require human sacrifice. So it's safe to say that Solomon instituted human sacrifice in the nation of Israel. And when you study the six-pointed star that was his personal seal, that's how you put a hex on somebody, and that's how you open doorways to the demonic realm. So I personally believe that the grimoires of Solomon were written by Solomon. He was the wisest man in the world, and it took someone of great wisdom to be able to master these rituals and the sacred geometry and the mathematics involved. But that being said, the first keys of Solomon include chants and spells and curses to summon or restrain demons and spirits of the dead. That's what the Nephilim are. The disembodied Nephilim after the flood become all of the demonic spirits on the planet Earth and in the bottomless pit. So when it says here that Solomon has figured out a way to make spells and curses and chants that summon the demons and the spirits of the dead, we're talking about Nephilim spirits. That's why in the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, we see the king using dark arts to control the giants. That's the parallel. That represents Solomon. Now, in the Greater and Lesser Keys of Solomon, Solomon describes the divine magic of controlling the 72 demonic hierarchical groups, collectively known as the jinns or the genies. This is where we learn of the concept of the genie in the bottle, which is really a demonic spirit that's living inside of a vessel. They were kept imprisoned inside of brass vessels under strict guard and control by King Solomon. This is the origin of the genie. So in the next scene of the movie, we have a couple of little midget-looking people who are doing a play so that people can enjoy and watch. It's a play on the great mythology of Eric the Great. Hello, mates, I'm Eric the Great. Would you like to hear how I defeated the giants? The crowd screams, yeah! In Gantua, we set our scene, where a stalk has grown from a magic bean, and from there, beyond the reach of men, a plague of giants did descend. And what do we have over here? Well, did you get anything out of him? No, he wouldn't spill the beans. We've all heard that expression before. Spilling the beans? That comes from this fairy tale of Jack and the Beanstalk. I'm going to ask you just once, where are the beans? You should have left them where they were buried. They were born of dark magic. Notice what he says next. And once darkness gets a taste for light, it will not stop until it's swallowed the sun. That's a very interesting expression right there. As if darkness is alive and it's like a cancer, it's consuming all light until it's literally swallowed the sun. I want you to imagine a scenario where a doorway was opened up to an alternate dimension, and in that dimension is an endless, bottomless black pit full of demons and demogorgons and nephilim giants, and that as they come in, this darkness wants to consume all light on planet Earth, because that's what we're talking about here. Once the black darkness consumes all light and eventually consumes the sun, this is what you're looking at. A big black hole. Kind of like the one in Revelation 9 that Abaddon, the king of the scorpion locusts, opens up. You cannot hope to control it. They will never let you succeed. And then they go into a little poem again. Are you ready, my brothers? Can you taste it? These are the giants. Here comes the thunder. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Onward and downward. Feast on the mankind. Sweet blood. Make way for the others. To Albion. Fee, fi, fo, and fum. I like mankind served well done. Fallon likes them raw and red, freshly snatched and not quite dead. Victory, I can almost taste it. Your scent is faint, princess, mixed with smoke clouded by char, but we can always smell fear. So these are examples here of some kind of demonic biblical truths. These entities want to eat mankind and drink the blood. That's why all the other lectures we've looked at, movies like Lord of the Rings, the orcs who come from the underworld, they feast on flesh and they drink blood. All of these different movies that have all of the symbolism of the Nephilim always demonstrate this same concept. Some of them like them well done, some of them like them raw and red. Then later we see that they're talking about eating the princess and that they can always smell fear. This is back to the demonic side of this equation. The demons, they pick up on the vibration and frequencies that we are emitting. So for example, the demonic entity of fear or lust, if you are suffering with fear and your adrenaline's running and your fight or flight system's pounding, you're putting off a spiritual scent that actually draws the demonic spirit of fear to come and piggyback around you and to begin feeding off of that. That's what these demons live off of. They don't live off of food like you and I. Our emotions and our sin and our fear, our pride, our lust, etc., that is what feeds them and makes them stronger. They go on to say how mankind likes to immortalize itself, thinks it can live forever. You smell that, brothers? Don't you love it when their blood curdles? This is the giants are getting ready to eat flesh. The tales of these giants have been long known in Britain for millennia. Even the story of King Arthur, the famous King Arthur's encounter with the giant of St. Michael, who was on Mount St. Michael. This story dates back all the way to 1136. That's 1,000 years ago. And other historians like Sir Thomas Malory wrote stories about giants back in the 1400s. In the book on King Arthur, it says, "Then came King Arthur, a husbandman." It's an interesting choice of words. It's the same word we hear of regarding Noah directly after the flood. That Noah was a husbandryman and he built a vineyard. So perhaps this King Arthur figure, the mythology here is that we know Noah is the only one who survived along with his children to talk about these giants. Everybody else was destroyed. So after the flood, obviously Noah and his 3 sons and their wives, they're the ones who continued to communicate the oral traditions of the giants with their children, their grandchildren, and so on and so forth. And so there's an interesting connection there between King Arthur the husbandryman and Noah the husbandryman. Either way, King Arthur then came King Arthur and told him how there was a great giant which had slain, murdered, and devoured much people of the country. Arthur journeyed to the mount and discovered the giant roasting dead children, and inhaling them, saying, "Arise and dress thee, thou glutton, for this day shalt thou die of my hand." Then the glutton started up, and took a great club in his hand, and he smote at the king, that his coronal fell to the earth. And the king hit him again, that he carved his belly, and cut off his genitors, that his guts and his entrails fell down to the ground. Then the giant threw away his club, and he caught the king in his arms, that he crushed his ribs. And then Arthur weltered and wrung, that he was other while under, and another time above. And so weltering and wallowing, they rolled down the hill till they came to the sea mark. And ever as they so weltered, Arthur smote him with his with his dagger. So we look at these old stories like King Arthur fighting this large giant man who's eating children, and we've always assumed that this is just fairy tale. But the King Arthur mythology series had to come from somewhere, and I would bet dollars to donuts that it goes back to the Nephilim stories that we've seen all around. There are many ancient writings going back to these books in Scotland in the 1500s. Shakespeare talked about giants. Thomas Nash wrote multiple stories about giants in the 1500s. So they got these ideas from somewhere. It's also interesting where the giants always come from. It's always somewhere on top of a mountain. For example, Zeus and all of the demigods come from Mount Olympus. All of the fallen angels in the book of Enoch, they descended down upon Mount Hermon, where they made the oath to sleep with the women. Now we're being told a story about St. Michael's Mount. During the 6th century, before a castle was ever built, according to legend, of course, the island of St. Michael's Mount sits upon what was once home to an 18-foot giant named Cormoran, who lived in a cave with his ill-gotten treasures obtained by terrorizing local towns and villages. That is until a young farmer's son named Jack took on this gigantic menace who had an appetite for cattle and children, and he killed him by trapping him in a concealed pit and then bringing down his axe upon his head. When he returned home, the elders in the village gave him a hero's welcome, and ever since then he's been called Jack the Giant Killer. Now, was this a real story that happened in the 6th century AD? I doubt it, but it's possible. We know that some of these giants have existed for a long time. Maybe this is just a retelling of David. I mean, in this situation, we have a young farmer's son. David was a young shepherd boy, and David is the one who faced Goliath, and Goliath was one of the giants. And as it turns out, David killed Goliath by cutting his head off with a sword. In this situation, we see that they trap him and then take his head off with an axe. So, again, all of these stories are based on a kernel of truth, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the giant lives on Mount St. Michael, because that's similar to these other mounts that they come from. By the way, this is Mount St. Michael. Pretty awesome looking place, if you ask me. Now, there's a little bit more symbolism that's enshrouded in the movie, and that, in my opinion, is the time frame. The time frame of this movie is way back in the Dark Ages, where you have all the kings and the queens and the royal bloodlines, the dynasties, and you have all of the big Masonic pillars and temples and the big Masonic castles and everything that they symbolize in that era. And so, if you go back to some of the previous lectures, I demonstrated that Cain and the Kenites are the original seed of the serpent. They're the first master masons. Cain was the first one to build the first city. His great-great-great-great-great-grandson Tubal-Cain was the first master craftsman in metal. That's why when you go into Masonic temples today, you'll see pictures of Tubal-Cain. You'll see bronze images of Tubal-Cain. And if you study the Masonic rituals, you'll see that Tubal-Cain is one of the names for some of the passwords. So that is the true heritage of the Masonic religion, the seed of the serpent. It's this Babylonian mystery religion based on occultism and sacred geometry. It goes back thousands of years. They were taught that from the fallen angels. The eternal secrets of heaven were taught to mankind from the angels, and it's been maintained in this Masonic heritage. And so all throughout the Old Testament, when you see cities like Sidon and Tyre and the Canaanites and the Phoenicians, they're the ones who were building the pillars of Hercules. They're the ones who were building the royal arches. They were the ones that were building the large megalithic structures. Some of the ancient cities in Bashan that we read about in the Old Testament that were fortified and full of the Amorites, like King Og of Bashan, the 15-foot giant. They were the original stonemasons. They were the big, huge remnant of the giants who had the capacity to cut and build and pick up and put together these megalithic structures. And so when you see in the movie all of this symbolism of the areas of these Masonic castles with knights and kings and queens and bloodlines, that is all partially true. That is all symbolic of the origins of this Masonic Nephilim group. You see the royal flags with symbols on them. You see the large pillars. You can see archways, the royal arches, etc. So to summarize, what I would say is that these movies have a lot of subliminal programming. There's a lot of predictive programming in them. That doesn't mean that every person that was involved with typecasting the movie knows about this. It's deeper than that. This has been seared within the DNA and the consciousness and the psyche of humanity, and it exists deep down within humanity. It always has, going all the way back to that era. There was a time on this planet when angels and humans mated and created giants, and those giants consumed everything on planet Earth, including human beings. And then from there, they introduced all of the fallen angelic technology for creating hybridized chimeras, as well as witchcraft and sorcery and mastering the zodiac, etc. They also invented all the metal weapons. They taught the men all the eternal secrets of heaven, currency, money, everything. And so our entire system is overshadowed by that past. And therefore it remains within the consciousness of humanity. And a lot of these people who are producing these movies are very secular people. Many of them are not born again and walking with the Lord. Many of them have not received the Holy Spirit. So as a consequence, they're under the influence of the deluding spirit of this world, and that spirit inspires them to do these concepts. And that's how these ideas remain alive within the minds of men. And so there's some things that can be gleaned by this information. One, they testify to the fact that this all happened. The fact that we're looking at these movies in 2020 testifies to the fact that this mythology goes back a long ways. Number two, it testifies to the potential future. Notice in the story, the giants are coming back. They're coming back to settle the score with humanity. And we're going to see that on multiple levels. One, eventually, Apollyon's going to open up the pit, and some of these creatures are going to come out. But before that happens, we're also going to see some things on this planet, such as the transhumanism project, where the idea of Nephilim is going to have a New Age connotation to it. Basically, the Nephilim are just hybridized species. And so the way that they're wanting to merge man and machine, that could be considered Nephilim. And since demonic entities can manifest inside of technology, a man-machine could be a vessel for demonic entities. Also, we have the extraterrestrial movement, where thousands of people are claiming to be abducted and have their genetic material and the reproductive material removed from their body and then mixed with the aliens. And there are many women who've gone on record of even saying that they're now in communication with their hybrid children, who are claiming that get ready for the new age of Aquarius, the golden age, where these hybrids are going to come down from outer space, presenting themselves as extraterrestrials in order to help save mankind when we're right on the brink of destruction. So there are many layers to how these Nephilim are going to present themselves in the future. But nonetheless, they are going to present themselves. This is the great delusion of 2 Thessalonians 2. And I think on that note, we're going to wrap it up. It's not too late to come to the Lord. Today is the day of salvation. If you're waiting, I would admonish you not to wait. Time is moving along. There's great turmoil in the world. There's great turmoil in the United States. Very difficult times lie ahead. The New World Order are using everything they can to destroy our freedoms, our constitutional rights, and they want to destroy Christianity too. And so today is the day of salvation. The only way you're going to make it through the future is if you're covered by the power and the presence of the Holy Spirit. And I pray that the Lord will be with you, and we'll see you on the next one.